Sean Dugas, a former reporter universally liked by nearly everyone, is found dead in a shallow grave underneath a concrete slab over 300 miles away from his own home. His body was brutally beaten and contorted into a small container, and his skull was shattered, having to be physically reconstructed by forensic examiners. These are the two culprits, Christopher and William Cormier, both 31 at the time of the incident. Two identical twins with a checkered past that did just about everything together, including murder. To better understand what went down, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. At some point around 1980, the twins' father, Bill Cormier, met an unnamed woman and began a romantic relationship with her. It's around this time Christopher and William were conceived. 9 months later, in 1981, Christopher and William were born, with William being the elder by a mere 5 minutes. The twins were mischievous from a young age, often pulling pranks on their parents and teachers by switching places. Being identical twins, people often had a hard time telling the Cormier boys apart. One key difference people did notice was that William was essentially the leader and was way more assertive, whereas Chris was laid back and simply followed whatever William said. That's some chilling foreshadowing, and you'll understand why by the end of the story. The first sign of trouble came early in the twins' lives, right around the mid-1980s when they were only 4 years old. The boys were in a bedroom in their father's home in New Orleans, taking turns playing with a cigarette lighter, passing it back and forth, and generally just messing around, when one of them caught a nearby bed on fire. The fire quickly got out of hand within mere minutes, setting the sheets and eventually the mattress itself ablaze. William ran to his father Bill, screaming, "The bed is on fire and I did not do it." Despite sounding the alarm, the house was severely damaged by the flames, with some articles stating that it had been almost completely burned down. Shortly after the fire in 1986, in a possible attempt to recoup money after the fire, Bill Cormier started an escort service and ironically named it A Touch of Class. Inevitably, this put Bill on the wrong side of the law more often than not, something he was not totally unfamiliar with, being a small-time criminal. Due to the nature of their father's new business, the twins ended up living with their grandmother in Mississippi for an unspecified duration. It's around this time in the same year their mother was arrested for prostitution. It's unclear if Bill was using his own wife to quote-unquote serve his new clients to get his business going, but if he was, that wouldn't be surprising. Desperate to free his wife and get her charges expunged, Bill went to the local police, who eventually got the DEA involved. The three parties ended up mutually agreeing on a deal. The plan was to use Bill's escort business to attract clientele, who would then be promptly arrested as part of a DEA sting operation. In exchange, Bill's wife's charges would be expunged from her record and she would be set free. Over the next few months, Bill's work with the authorities paid off and his wife was freed shortly afterward. However, the damage to their already shaky relationship was done, leading to a divorce between the two. Bill won sole custody of the twins in the divorce, and it would seem the boys didn't have much of a relationship with their mother afterwards, with both twins making comments such as, "I hate my mother" and "I disavow her." The boys' home life stability was non-existent, to say the least. Bill was almost always struggling financially, and as a result was always chasing that next big job, the next big thing, the next big paycheck, the next big breakthrough, to limited levels of success, usually being rather unsuccessful most of the time. In fact, their early life was such a blur that both William Cormier and Chris Cormier claimed to not remember the first 10 years of their lives. Now, whether that's true or not is up for debate, but I just felt it was worth noting. Saying Bill was nomadic would be a massive understatement. He went through job titles such as hotel manager, computer technician, and car salesman, to name a few, typically moving to a new area or even new state in the process. With the family moving around so much, the twins had almost zero chance of making friends or keeping long-lasting relationships. The sole exception to this was in the early 90s. Their father decided to settle down in Pensacola, Florida for a few years while being a car salesman in the area. In their free time, the adolescent twins often frequented comic book shops and card shops. It was at one of these shops the pair first met Sean Dugas, an easygoing boy from a nearby wealthy suburb. Despite the obvious differences in their upbringing and backgrounds, even from an early age, Sean was said to be non-judgmental and very easy to get along with. He was also a child of divorce, much like the twins, and understood some of the hardships that came with it. The trio quickly bonded over their love of Magic the Gathering, a card game that at the time was still in its infancy. They frequently met up with Sean to play Magic the Gathering, playing long into the night at tournaments and other events. But all good things must come to an end. A few years later in 1996, their father found a job in Atlanta and uprooted the family yet again. The pair still stayed in contact with Sean as much as they could given the circumstances in the following years. By this time, the twins were both age 15. The boys had been to 18 different schools in 8 different states. With them both being 15, Bill expected them to contribute to the household bills and utilities. The pair obtained various service-type jobs to do so, but the full-time work week meant the pair began struggling in school, leading to them dropping out in their 10th grade year to work more hours. Bill had no qualms with this and seemed to want financial help at any cost, even if that help potentially hampered the boys' future. In their teenage years, the boys and Bill would often butt heads, leading to verbal and physical altercations. One such incident saw Bill striking Chris during a heated argument, causing the twins to briefly run away from home. Bill didn't really care and didn't pursue him and didn't try and go after him, and the boys eventually returned. If you couldn't tell by now, the trio had a very unhealthy relationship. Drugs, financial problems, physical fights, and trouble with the law were all prevalent aspects in their lives. This pattern continued for a few years until eventually Chris decided to leave the dysfunctional family home at age 19 in order to get a management job at a Kansas Waffle House. Not too long after that, also tired of the family troubles, William joined the Navy and was stationed at Pensacola, Florida in 2001 at age 20. While there, he got married to an unnamed woman. The two twins, who had been together their whole lives side by side and doing everything together, were now states apart doing their own thing. Even without their father immediately nearby, both boys still had their share of trouble. Chris was arrested in 2003 for possession of meth with intent to distribute. William was a bit better off at this time, but ended up having his own issues. He injured his back and had to be medically discharged from the Navy in 2004. He rebounded by getting a management job at a Waffle House, and by 2006 he had his first child. However, in 2007 his world came crumbling down in a series of events. His wife filed for divorce, he lost custody of his son, and eventually he lost his job at Waffle House for unknown reasons. And to top all of that off, he owed $600 per month in child support with no way to pay it now. With both twins' lives in turmoil at this point, they reconnected and began to assist one another. They also began playing poker in their free time as a hobby. William helped Christopher return to a job at Waffle House with his connections. In turn, Christopher assisted William with his child support payments. However, the two still couldn't seem to pull away from their father. He became prevalent in their lives yet again. Throughout the next handful of years, the three argued, had physical brawls, and Chris actually got hit with drug charges due to marijuana being found by police in his father's safe. The twins frequently moved in, back out, back in, rinse and repeat, fight after fight, argument after argument. It was a never-ending cycle that seemingly couldn't be broken. Although around or about 2010 they stopped living with their father for quite some time. It was in this year that the duo ended up back around Pensacola, Florida. Former friends of William and Chris say the pair got an apartment together in the area. It's at this apartment where Sean Dugas would frequently come visit his old friends, chatting them up about anything under the sun while drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes with the twins. He was the only friend the twins were able to keep through their turbulent adolescent and teen years. To make ends meet at the time, Chris worked at a local Steak and Shake, and William got a gig as a poker dealer at a Greyhound racetrack. Not one to be left out of his brother's dealings, Christopher was often seen gambling in the area in his free time. At some point, William lost his poker gig and became unemployed. Not to be outdone, Chris lost his job at Steak and Shake right around the same time. With both of them now unemployed, the two delved deeper into poker, often going on trips to various poker tables in order to gamble to try and generate money. What once started as a hobby became the twins' so-called full-time job. They even started to dub themselves professional poker players despite being just above average by all accounts. As you can imagine, being a poker player as a full-time profession would have many ups and downs. Even if the skill was there, it would not be what one would call a stable, long-term profession for most people. And as it turns out, it was not stable at all and frequently had the twins scrounging up whatever meager amount of money they could to get by. Inevitably, they began to grow tired of this aspect. After being away from their father for a solid year or slightly more, the twins decided to move back in with him into his one-story home in Winder, Georgia. The twins were having money problems and figured that moving back would alleviate some of those issues. After all, more people under one roof meant the bills would be split in more directions. With the addition of the twins, the home became crowded as Bill now had their disabled sister and her two kids living with him. The inside of the home was described as dark, drafty, and dingy. And it's at this very house that a dark secret would soon be buried within the backyard. In the week leading up to that fateful day on August 27, 2012, the twins were hurting for money. badly. Their poker winnings and Bill's disability check were usually just enough to get the family by, but times were tough at this point. William and Chris planned to go on a multiple-day gambling trip all around Pensacola, Florida in order to try and make some money starting on August 22nd. Bill gave the twins money to get a rental car in order to get there. Still living in the area, the twins' old friend Sean Dugas heard about their trip and invited them to stay at his home rather than spend money on a room. The twins accepted. Sean Dugas had made a great name for himself in the Pensacola area since the twins had met him nearly 2 decades prior. He had been a reporter for the Pensacola News Journal from 2005 to 2010, often using some of his extra funds to contribute to various homeless shelters and food pantries. His friends stated in simple terms, Sean wanted to make the world a better place. Sean would talk to anyone and everyone he could about any number of topics. It could be the clerk at the gas station, people at comic book shops, strangers at parties, someone loitering outside of a store, it didn't matter. Sean always seemed ready to offer up friendly conversation. People in the area could easily recognize Sean from his dreadlocks and his vintage clothes. A fellow Magic player, Brandon Glass, that knew Sean from a card shop stated, "He was the nicest guy I ever met. He was a free spirit, living the hippie lifestyle to the fullest." Sean was known as an avid collector in the Magic the Gathering community, which he was still a part of all these years later. In fact, he was seen as somewhat of a local legend among Magic the Gathering players in the Pensacola area due to his vast collection of rare cards. Sean was known to have a collection that easily surpassed $100,000. For those unfamiliar with the game or the collectible side of it, certain rare Magic cards of certain editions from very old packs can fetch thousands upon thousands of dollars. Sean had plenty of these types of cards, Black Lotus, Time Walk, and Mox Ruby to name a few. When the twins arrived at Sean's home in Pensacola on August 22nd, 2012, they found that Sean had his jaw wired shut. His beard was also completely shaven. As it turns out, he had gotten knocked unconscious by a man at a party just a few days prior to the twins' arrival. Despite his injuries, he was happy and excited to be reunited with his 2 old friends. The 3 decided to go to a nearby pub to catch up, and at some point, Sean's pain worsened and the twins took him to the ER. After his ER visit, Sean made an appointment with an oral surgeon for August 27th, which would just be in 5 days' time. Between August 22nd and August 27th, something bad happened between Sean and the Cormier twins. Instead of staying the night at his own house with the twins, Sean slept on a couch at his friend's home across town, and he kept this up for 4 or 5 days. The friend he stayed with stated that Sean just didn't want to go home, and that he didn't seem scared of the twins, just irritated by them. Sean didn't want to, quote, be an asshole and tell them to leave, but something was obviously wrong. The twins, in some way or another, had overstayed their welcome with Sean. Regardless of that, Sean did return home on Monday, August 27th, where the twins drove Sean to his oral surgery appointment. Upon leaving this appointment at around 11 a.m., Sean used William's phone and made lunch plans with his friend Patricia Burke for 1:45 p.m. that afternoon. The trio then headed back to Sean's house. Now, what exactly took place inside the home in full detail isn't fully known. All we have is what Christopher Cormier told detectives. As Christopher was in a room by himself, an argument broke out across the home. Christopher heard a man scream. He then saw Sean running away from William, gunning for a back door. Sean, being the smaller guy, had a small lead on William, but Sean was grabbed right before he could open the back door and escape, and was then struck in the back of the head multiple times with a blunt object, possibly a hammer. His skull was shattered in the process. Sean fell to the floor and within moments was dead from the vicious attack. As he always did, William tried to take charge of the situation. He left with some of Sean's Magic the Gathering collection and had Chris stay put in the home near the body. As William was leaving the house at around 1:15 p.m., Patricia Burke showed up to Sean's house for their lunch plans. William plainly told her that Sean wasn't home and that his plans had changed. Patricia, thinking this was kinda odd, decided to linger around the house, hoping to at least see Sean and maybe find out what happened. Within a mere 10 minutes, she received a call from an unknown number. It was William. He still had her number in his recent calls from when Sean had called her earlier that day to make plans. He told her that Sean wouldn't be home for many hours and that she should leave his house. Hesitantly, she did, not knowing that her friend was just on the other side of the door, his body battered and beaten. What's really eerie about this aspect of the case is that Chris would have still been inside with the body and possibly relayed to William that Patricia was still outside after a few minutes, which caused him to call her. William stopped by a local card shop to sell a small amount of Sean's magic cards for an undisclosed amount of money on his way to Walmart. He then drove to Walmart. While there, he purchased a plastic tarp, foam crack sealant, a blue storage bin, multiple air fresheners, fragrance oils, and potpourri. When he got back to the house with the supplies, Chris helped him contort and cram Sean's body into the tarp, where it was then placed into a sheet, and finally into the empty blue storage bin. Potpourri and air fresheners were then thrown onto and around Sean's body, and the lid was then closed. Foam sealant, typically used to seal cracks in wood and other material, was used all around the lid, possibly in an attempt to mitigate smells coming from the container in the coming days. The two then grabbed all of Sean's magic cards before leaving the house, leaving the blue bin sitting inside the home. The pair then went on some sort of twisted card selling tour as Sean's body decayed back in his Pensacola home. Firstly, they arrived at a sci-fi convention known as Dragon Con in Atlanta the weekend after murdering Sean, where they sold $5,844 in rare cards to some card vendors there. William was said by witnesses to be the one haggling and doing all of the deals, while Chris just kind of stood idly by, occasionally leaving to go smoke a cigarette. With the money, William ditched the rental car and bought a used Chrysler Sebring for cash. September 3rd. The twins returned to Pensacola. William rented a U-Haul while Chris signed on the dotted line to rent a storage unit. The U-Haul was used to bring some of Sean's belongings as well as his decaying body to the unit, where it was then stored. With Sean's body now out of the home, William got to work moving valuables into the storage unit and trying to clean any basic evidence of the murder up. With witnesses all around seeing him at the house, William decided he wanted to leave as fast as possible. In order to accomplish this, William hired a landscaping crew as well as a cleaning crew to clean the inside of the home, making it appear as though Sean had simply moved away, while hoping any evidence inside the home would be destroyed in the process. He told the crew he was the owner of the house and his tenant had just left this stuff behind. They had no apparent reason to not believe him and just began working. Anything of potential high value was thrown into the U-Haul by William, while anything else was taken to a local landfill by the cleaning crew. When neighbors passed by and noticed the U-Haul and various crews working in and around the home, they approached William and asked him what's going on. He was quoted as saying, "Yeah, Sean is moving out and he's coming to live with me." Some of the neighbors thought it was pretty odd that Sean wasn't around at any point during the entire process, but they ultimately accepted it. At some point while moving items to and from the U-Haul, Chris injured his arm on a window and couldn't do much from that point forward. William continued moving Sean's items, eventually finishing up. He paid the lawn crew and cleaning crew in cash before departing. The U-Haul full of valuables was then put into the storage unit next to Sean's body. The twins then continued to piecemeal off a few cards here and there from Sean's collection to various card and comic book shops over the next few days, although it's not specified how much they got from the smaller transactions. On September 6th, William and Chris returned to the storage unit. They removed all of the items as well as the rapidly decaying body of Sean. They left the storage unit entirely empty with the door left up, not bothering to even alert the storage unit company that the unit was now empty. They were in a real hurry. Sean's friends and family really began to worry about him around September 7th. Sean's parents had not heard from him in weeks, and while Sean was sometimes flighty and scatterbrained according to them, he wouldn't have gone this long without contacting them. A handful of days, sure, that was somewhat normal for Sean, but not close to 2 weeks at this point. His father reported him missing to law enforcement, which led to a search for Sean Dugab by authorities. Patricia Burke returned to Sean's home to find the house completely empty with the exception of a broken TV. All of Sean's charcoal paintings, spoon collection, furniture, and magic cards were just gone. It was like he just picked up and left. That same day, Bill Cormier heard a low rumbling coming down the street. He saw his two boys parking a U-Haul truck outside of his house. When he went outside, they explained they had just helped a friend move, but dropped him off on the way home. When the roll-up door to the U-Haul was opened, an extremely foul smell similar to a dead animal was emitted, slapping Bill right in the face. When Bill asked about it, the twins just explained that their friend had a dog who unfortunately had passed away on the drive home, and that's where the smell was coming from. Bill seemed to accept this notion with no further prodding, although it did stay in the back of his mind. As for the items inside the U-Haul, William claimed the friend wanted them to hold on to them and even keep certain items that he didn't want. Despite the obvious red flags and holes in their story, Bill didn't want to question his sons and start an argument or a physical altercation. But there were many red flags. For example, the stench of a dog that had died on the way home wouldn't have produced odors of that intensity in such a short time. Sure, it may have smelled, but not with the same intensity that a human body that had been dead for 2 weeks would. The boys also seemed to have a lot of disposable income out of nowhere despite having next to nothing when they had left. Another oddity was, why would the friend want to be dropped off somewhere without most of his items? There were multiple things that ranged from mildly odd to downright suspicious. The twins asked their father if they could bury the dog in the backyard, to which he said yes. William dug a hole just big enough for the blue container that held Sean's body and then lightly covered it with dirt. The next day, William all of a sudden decided he was going to build a barbecue pit, complete with a concrete slab and everything. It just so happens it was going to go right over the top of where he buried the supposed dog. William went to the hardware store and came back with some 2x4s, stakes, cement buckets, and a concrete mixer. Over the next 2 days periodically, that being September 8th and 9th, William made a square frame with the 2x4s and poured a concrete slab right over the container where Sean was buried, effectively sealing him inside. With Chris's arm still injured, he merely stood by and watched the majority of the time. The finished product looked like any other barbecue spot within a backyard, a small square plot of concrete where a grill could be placed on top of and people could socialize in the future, all while a dead body was underneath them. On September 10th, William met the same 2 vendors from the Atlanta Dragon Con convention I mentioned earlier in Tennessee. The plan was to originally meet in Kentucky, but William's car that he recently bought broke down on the way there. This transaction is notable because 3 of Sean's most valuable cards were sold in this transaction. Time Walk, Mox Ruby, and a Black Lotus card, one of Sean's prized possessions, was sold to the 2 vendors in Tennessee for $12,021. William then directed Bill to come pick up the Chrysler, which he did, and it ended up needing $2,000 in repairs, which William paid for in cash. William stopped at a few other places to kind of piecemeal off a few other cards here and there before finally returning back to his father's Winder, Georgia home. While there, he bought a used BMW for $5,100. The twins were still actively selling off bits and pieces of Sean's card collection for hundreds to thousands of dollars per session, as well as getting rid of Sean's other less valuable items over the next few weeks. William or Chris, it's unknown which one, asked their father to throw away a large antique spoon collection, which he did, throwing them away in a dumpster at a nearby Sonic restaurant. As you may have figured, this was Sean's spoon collection. On the morning of October 8th, Bill received a call from a Pensacola detective about a missing person last seen with his son William. That missing person, of course, being Sean Dugas. After having a brief conversation with the detective and hanging up, Bill remembered that awful smell coming from the U-Haul, the dog story, as well as the random valuables now scattered all throughout his home. He went and asked the twins if they knew what was going on, to which they replied, "No, we don't." Bill later overheard one of the twins say that they needed to move what was in the backyard. For one reason or another, the twins didn't ever get to do that. Possibly because the concrete was now too hard to get through without drawing even more suspicion to themselves with heavy power equipment. It could have been because their father now kind of suspected them of doing something, or maybe they figured law enforcement didn't have anything on them. Whatever the case, Sean Dugas' body remained under that concrete slab crammed into that cheap blue container. Bill called the detective back and told him all that he knew. The random items strewn about his home, the friend story, and the supposed dead dog that his boys had buried in the backyard. Later that same day, a search warrant was executed for Bill Cormier's home while the twins were out buying trash bags. Underneath a shallow pile of leaves in the backyard, police located a square concrete slab encased by 2x4s. Police used an excavator to lift the concrete slab where they saw the corner of a blue container encased by dried dirt on all sides, with the top entirely encased within the concrete slab. Police were forced to carefully cut the container from the bottom to reveal what was inside. Inside, wrapped inside of a tarp and bedsheet littered with potpourri and fragrance oils, was the badly decomposed body of Sean Dugas. Sean had suffered a shattered skull from what looked to be a hammer, along with multiple cuts and stabs to his head and neck that ultimately caused his death.
Georgia police say autopsy results show the man found in a blue storage container was killed by several blows to the back of the head, and that the crime happened about a month ago. Winder police also say authorities need to find out where the homicide occurred.
Both William and Chris Cormier started to drive up to the house as this was all being discovered, but saw the police outside and decided to turn around. Expecting this very reaction, detectives quickly caught up with them and they were subsequently arrested for the murder of Sean Dugas. Police were later able to get a positive ID for Sean based on dental records, and they also found Sean's blood located inside of the rented U-Haul vehicle that was tied back to the twins. Sean's antique spoon collection was found in the Sonic dumpster just as Bill had told them. When the brothers were taken in and questioned, they took completely opposite approaches to try and get out of things. Christopher first claimed he had not seen Sean in over a month before his murder and otherwise stayed silent. William, on the other hand, immediately concocted a story where he blamed Christopher for the murder and subsequent planning. He claimed that they did in fact stay at Sean's home before going to a sci-fi convention. He claimed that after the convention he spoke to Sean over the phone. He went on to say that upon returning to Sean's home, Chris produced a note from Sean that said he fled the home in fear of a guy that had previously attacked him and to please help move his stuff to a house in Cantonment and sell his magic collection for him. Obviously, he knew his father had told authorities about the U-Haul and items. His solution to that aspect was to call his father a liar on every single statement. The U-Haul? He's a liar, I didn't do that. The smell? He lied. Sean's items? He never saw those. He lied about that too. Moving the body and burying it? I have no idea why he would say that. He must have lied. When confronted with the neighbor's statements placing him at the house, he called them liars as well. He did the same for the yard and cleaning service owners he used to clean Sean's home after the murder. Everyone was a liar on every statement made about him with the exception of Patricia Burke, but he claimed he turned her away in fear that she might tell Sean's attackers of his plans to move. Needless to say, this all fell flat, and William admitted to lying about the Cantonment story, but said he only told that story because Christopher told him to. He was effectively trying to force all of the blame on his brother while taking hardly any for himself. He painted himself as this unknowing guy that just got roped into everything and was simply listening to his brother. Chris eventually broke his silence and told investigators that while he was in another room of Sean's house, he heard a man scream. When he stepped out, he saw William chasing Sean as he was running for an exit door. Chris continued, saying that William caught up to Sean and hit him in the back of the head with what looked to be a hammer and killed him. Chris would later go on to revise this story a little bit, going on to say that he saw William and Sean Dugas get into an argument over something, and then William followed Sean into the garage where William hit Sean in the back of the head with a hammer, and then he said the garage door closed and he didn't see anything else after that. This confession led to the Florida indictment of the two. The charges that were brought forth by the state of Florida were first-degree murder and robbery with a weapon for William, and accessory to murder and unarmed burglary of an unoccupied dwelling for Chris. As the twins' trial approached quickly, William wrote his father a letter from jail threatening to end his own life. He claimed he was going to do so to try and prevent Christopher from having to go to trial despite his earlier attempts to pin the full blame on Chris. He never ended up going through with it. When the pair were set to be transported from Georgia back to a Pensacola jail, the twins were seated in a van mere feet from one another, separated by a metal grate. During the 300 to 400 mile ride, William confronted Chris, hypocritically angry that he would sell him out to investigators. Chris defended himself by saying that he only made the confession under sleep and food deprivation. When the van stopped at the Pensacola jail, Chris was assigned to the 6th floor and William the 2nd floor. They said their goodbyes to one another and went their separate ways. The case went to trial on February 9th, 2014 and lasted a total of 4 days, finishing on the 13th. In the courtroom, Sean's friends and family were present. His mother clutched a photo of Sean the entire time. Members of Sean's family had to temporarily leave at certain points when the more gruesome evidence was shown depicting the aftermath of the violent attack. The prosecution came after the twins with hard evidence, mainly targeting William Cormier, as all evidence pointed to him being the primary culprit in the murder. Surveillance footage from Walmart was shown with William buying each and every exact item that was found alongside Sean's body, including the blue tote itself that he was placed into. Footage from Home Depot was also presented to the jury, again with William buying exact items found with Sean's body. The tarp, odor rid, and more than 1 dozen air fresheners. Statements from neighbors, the cleaning crew and the lawn crew were brought forth, putting the twins directly at Sean Dugas' home in the time before, during, and after his death. Patricia Burke came forth, also tying William to the home. The U-Haul that had been rented in William's name had blood in it that matched Sean's. There was also surveillance video of William at the U-Haul facility. William's defense attorney went with the tactic of trying to shift large portions of the blame onto Christopher. He claimed that yes, William participated in buying the items that were found alongside Sean, and he did sell off Sean's stuff, but it was all under the guidance of Christopher, who had told him they were helping Sean move. William never admitted to the killing of Sean Dugas and claimed he knew nothing and was simply selling items for a friend and helping him move to a new location, all while fully trusting his brother. Nobody bought these excuses though. William was pointed out as being the sole person who benefited from Sean's death. He bought the Chrysler Sebring and the BMW and paid for repairs to the Sebring. There was no evidence of Christopher directly benefiting from the card sales. Statements from the card vendors who bought pieces of Sean's collection also stated that William was the one doing the selling, while Chris was more just kind of there as a passive observer. The letter William wrote his father while in prison was brought forth. As previously mentioned, it states his wishes to end it all in order to protect Chris, but also ends with, "Chris wouldn't be in this situation if not for me," further pointing to William as the murderer. The most damning piece of evidence, though, was the testimony made by Bill Cormier, who admitted to seeing items in the U-Haul that were Sean Dugas, as well as noting the horrible smell coming from the U-Haul. Going further, he mentioned the dog burial excuse used by the twins, and later saw them digging a hole and eventually pouring a concrete slab over exactly where Sean's body was found. Essentially, the defense didn't have a leg to stand on with the evidence piling up, but they tried anyways in the closing statements. They claim that William was trying to get top dollar for Sean's cards in order to help Sean more, and that his actions weren't that of a thief. They went on to claim that a thief would have simply unloaded the items quickly and taken far less without haggling. William's defense attorney closed with saying that because there were no witnesses to the actual moment Sean was murdered, the evidence was merely circumstantial. He went on to say it's possible he did it, heck, it's even likely he did it, but that's not proof beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt. As for the prosecution side of things, Assistant State Attorney Bridget Jensen described William as broke, desperate, and above all else, greedy. She said, quote, "He took everything Sean had. He took his spoons, his furniture, he took his magic cards, and most importantly, he took his life. He sold Sean's own cards to buy that cheap plastic coffin to put Sean's body in." The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours, finding William Cormier guilty of murder. Before the sentencing, family members shared their memories of Sean while asking for the judge to give each twin the maximum sentence possible. Judge Terry Terrell sentenced William to life in prison without possibility of parole. Christopher Cormier was given 15 years in prison on accessory to murder charges. In the aftermath of Sean Dugas' death and subsequent trial, a great friend of Sean's named Jason King created Sean's Outpost, which is a homeless outreach center in Pensacola, Florida. Through their work, they've aided hundreds upon hundreds of individuals in need, potentially upwards to thousands.
All right, I would very much have not liked to have started Sean's Outpost. Sean's Outpost is, it's named after Sean Dugas, who was, and I'm going to cry saying this, who was my best friend, and he was murdered in 2012. Actually over theft of Magic the Gathering cards, which is really screwed up and it doesn't make any sense. I wasn't living in the same town with him at the time, and my wife and I found out that Sean died on CNN, which is just, it's horrible. And so we struggled for months after this loss of figuring out, you know, we had lost this amazing person, and what are we going to do to keep his memory alive?
William Cormier attempted to appeal his case in 2018 on multiple grounds, most of them being pretty nonsensical. One of them was that the full footage of him renting and returning the U-Haul was never shown, only an edited version. He claimed that the full version would have shown that his father came with him, therefore undermining his father's testimony. However, the footage was deemed unedited, so that statement didn't hold water. The next was that he wasn't read his Miranda rights before giving statements to police. It was deemed that even if this was the case, the negation of his statements given to law enforcement wouldn't have changed the trial outcome at all. The third thing was that William claimed that his nephew was never given the chance to testify, and if he was, he would have told them that Chris asked him to dig the hole where the body was eventually found. Again, because of evidence presented directly tying William to the murder and his actions in concealing Sean's death, this wouldn't have mattered or changed the trial outcome. Not one to give up, William continued that his financials were not shown. He claims his financial statements would have shown he had a good deal of money from being a professional poker player. He said it would have also shown that he was paying for utilities at his father's house. This was quickly shot down though, as it was deemed that at the time of the murder, William did not even have money to buy a tarp, air fresheners, and other relatively inexpensive items without first selling some of Sean's stuff. William's initial life sentence with no parole was upheld. At the time of this video, Christopher Cormier will be getting out in a few years. Well guys, that's about all I have for y'all today. I appreciate you guys watching this far and hope you enjoyed the case. I'll see you next time. Crime Historian, out.